You are listening to GeekFest Rants on the IC Robots Radio Network.
You have located GeekFest Rants, the entertainment podcast for genre geeks like you.
Shall we play a game?
Covering the world of vintage and current film and television since 2010.
Game over, man! Game over!
Featuring in-depth conversations on sci-fi, horror, fantasy, comics, toys, and conventions.
So say we all! So say we all!
And now sit back, relax, and enjoy today's show.
BCS arm switch is on. Okay, Victor. Landing rocket arm switch is on. Here comes the throttle. Circuit breakers in. We have separation. Inboard and outboards are on. We're coming forward with the side stick. All looks good. Roger. I've got a blowout. Vapor 3. Pitch to 0. Pitch is out. I can't hold altitude. Direction alpha is on. Trim selected emergency. Flight calm. I can't hold it. She's breaking up. She's breaking.
Austin, astronaut, a man barely alive.
Gentlemen, we can rebuild him. We have the technology. We have the capability to make the world's first bionic man. Steve Austin will be that man. Better than he was before. Better, stronger, faster.
Hi everybody, and welcome once again to GeekFest Rants. My name is Carlos Perron, and today we're going to go into two different directions. First off, we're going to start with the book Cyborg, better known to some of you as the blueprint for the $6 Million Man. If you've ever seen the $6 Million Man, you'll see it was inspired by this book. It's on the credits. What we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the differences between the book, how does it compare, and I'm going to talk a little also about the fact that I had never seen the original TV movie and what's its place in the story of the $6 Million Man. Plus, I'll have a little bonus information regarding a certain action figure toy that I was able to get my hands on having to do with the $6 Million Man. Then I'm going to jump over to Star Wars posters, specifically a record poster, the poster that came with the original Star Wars soundtrack. A poster that I guess I've lost throughout the years somehow, like a lot of my older Star Wars stuff. And I was able to get it somewhat recently. And a little bit of the history of the artist who drew it and how it's so different than just about any other poster that was created for Star Wars. So let's get started with Cyborg versus the $6 Million Man.
Klaatu, Miranda,
You must burn the books, Montag. The books have nothing to say.
When I was your age, television was called books.
You, Mr. Bemis, are a reader. A reader? A reader. A reader of books, magazines, periodicals, newspapers.
Today I want to talk about a book that I recently read. This is a book I've been kind of chasing for a long time now and just kind of waiting for the right price. The book is called Cyborg by Martin Caidin. And for those of you who don't know, this is the book that inspired the $6 Million Man. Now, I've done a show about the $6 Million Man a very long time ago. We didn't really go that deep, I think, into the book itself, into, how this originated. The book is really, really interesting, and the main reason I wanted to read the book was because even though I had watched the show sporadically, and I was familiar with the major aspects of the $6 Million Man, for the life of me, I couldn't remember ever being able to recall watching or seeing how he became the $6 Million Man. Now, granted, in the show opening, you always get that montage of, he's a test pilot and something goes wrong and he gets hurt and they reconstruct him and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, okay, I get that. I understand that. But it always seemed really interesting that, wow, there are all these scenes about him having this accident, but for whatever reason, I could never find like episode 1, or episode 1 would always start with him already being the $6 Million Man. But yeah, again, back then when I watched the show, now, here's what gets a little wacky. When I watched the show, I believe it must have been back when I was in Uruguay. Again, black and white, translated in Spanish. Episodes come as they may. Obviously, no DVR, no VCR, no way of recording or watching things in order back in the late 70s, or mid-70s in this case. Here, possibly seen a few syndicated repeats, that sort of thing. But I was never able to watch this show from beginning to end. I was never able to kind of like take the whole thing in one shot. But I did remember certain key episodes, certain key components, of the story. But I figured, what, let's start in one place that kind of begins the whole thing, and that is the book. The book, as I said, I have been chasing this book for a little bit. As you guys know, one of the things I've been doing is collecting through eBay, movie tie-ins and paperbacks. That's how I do my searches. I go to eBay and put movie tie-in or movie paperback or TV paperback, that kind of a search. And then you get a bazillion movie, television related suggestions, for stuff like this. And this was one that's always been like, for some reason, again, maybe I wasn't looking that hard, but it kind of kept coming up a little expensive. And, when I buy books in that manner, I'm looking for a $3-4 book, something cheap, something that's a bargain. And every now and then, yes, I will pay a little more for something that I really, really want. But for the most part, most of these books I end up finding are very cheap. So I was able to find one at a decent price. I don't know if it cost me $5 or something like that. And I read the book. The book is really, really interesting. It is super, super technical. I've never read a book so technical before where, not only in the procedures of how these test flights taking place, but all the medical stuff having to do with his recovery and his surgeries. And then in the missions that he goes on. It's a very technical minded book, which was different. It's something I've never read like this before. And with me, I'm trying to compare it to the television series. The book basically follows Steve Austin's test flight. He's a military man, which is it's a little different, for the show. He's an astronaut. He's a Air Force guy. He's this. He's that. He's like the completely perfect, rounded person for this sort of thing. And I think he's engaged. He's going to be married soon. And yes, this test flight goes wrong. Something happens where, it's not foul play or anything. It's just a freak natural event, that makes his ship kind of wobble out of control, and he's completely devastated. The controls are, like I said before, the way that they describe the procedure of how this flight is taking place and all the different switches he's flipping, and he's thinking about this and he's concentrating on that and about his experiences, and it's really, really super detailed, and it's very enjoyable. It's very different. And you kind of get the feeling, off to the side that the government is also running a program about cybernetics, and they're kind of waiting for a possible test subject to pop up that could be a good match for this. So we meet some characters that will go on to show up in the television show. Obviously, Steve Austin is there. Oscar Goldman is there. And Rudy Wells, who becomes his most direct doctor, in the story. Now, granted, in the book, there's another doctor. I believe his name was Killian, somewhere in here, who is a more of a cybernetic expert. Rudy is more of a medical doctor, but he does have some experience. Oscar Goldman is the government guy, but there's another government guy in the mix. Now, one of the things that the book concentrates on and places a lot of attention to is how the decision is made, or how the decision is carried out of, to make him bionic. Obviously, he's out cold. He's practically dead. And, they kind of write that line of well, he's sort of, more or less has no family. And he is kind of, indirectly property of the United States because he's a soldier, he's an astronaut, he's that sort of thing. So, they are concerned with his reaction of how he will react to all this. But at the same time, there is a certain cold element of the government saying, let's do it, trigger it. And it's Rudy Wells's responsibility to be able to transition him, to see if it's working, to see if he's willing to go along with it. But obviously they can't do a damn thing until, they're able to revive him somewhat, because he's kind of like in a half-induced coma, to keep him from being in so much pain. And I did get a lot of this feeling, of RoboCop. There is a lot of that element while I was reading this book of will he want to do this? Does he even want to do this? There's an element here also that did transfer to one of the movies of him trying to kill himself at some point, because they're afraid he might try to do that at one point. But little by little, they are able to talk him into it, and he's adjusting to it, and he starts to see the differences of, not only what he can recover, but the fact that he can do more than just recover. And that's the selling point here, as far as being able to get him to go along with this, is that, even being able to have prosthetics, regular prosthetics, is kind of like not enough. In his particular case, they have to sell him on something more, which is what this project is all about. There's a really gut-wrenching scene where Rudy, I think, has to convince his fiancée, Steve's fiancée, to kind of abandon him, because he knows, or he feels, that any sort of recovery will be so painful that it will drive her away. It will make him even more in pain than before, and it'll just be a gigantic guilt fest of kind of putting up with him, of the type of recovery that, he needs. But it's a really awkward decision, because it's kind of like, it goes kind of against most of the things you see about trying to recover from something, where you do need that support system, of somebody familiar, somebody like a wife or a parent or a spouse or something like that. But here, it's kind of like the opposite. They kind of drive her away on purpose, which is, I think part of the reason is so that he does not have any attachments that can kind of claim or make a decision for him in order to have this experiment take place. So it is a little awkward. It seemed a little cold, even though Rudy is always like looking out for him for his best, the best intentions. But it kind of felt a little like, wow, this is a little bit of a manipulation thing taking place. So nobody can make a decision for him. So I would say about maybe half the book, or a little over half the book, is him recovering, getting adjusted to all these things, how the government is reacting to these things. And at a certain point, it becomes obvious that, okay, he can do these things. He's recovering kind of well. He's still having some issues. Every now and then he's, the entire recovery process is a process. He has a nurse that kind of starts to kind of fall in love with him, but doesn't pay too much attention to her because he's very cold. He's very, this is how he's dealing with it. He's very cold. He's very focused on the work, but doesn't really let anybody in, into his feelings, if you will. But sooner or later, that there's going to be a government thing happening where, it's okay. The experiment is working. Now we want him to go on a couple of missions, because he can do these things that normal people cannot do, regular soldiers cannot do, and that is part of what this is all about. There's not a lot of pushback, I think, as far as the story goes, in terms of him wanting to be independent at some point. He kind of seems to understand that this is what he's going to be doing. I don't get like I said, I don't see him wrestling too much with what to do now that you can do this. He does have some negative reactions when he does start to kind of warm up to women. I think it's, again, this nurse or a different nurse. They do stumble on a car accident, I think a bus, and he's able to rescue these kids from a burning bus or something like that. And one of the little girls he rescues has like screams when she sees his arm has ripped up and there's like, wires and stuff inside. And that kind of triggers him to, all of a sudden he's like, oh my God, he's having like the Frankenstein moment, if you will. But it just seems to me that at a certain point, once he's kind of ready to go, and once they explain to him what his missions are, or is, at the point, he's done. He's set. He's 100% at that point. And the book has him going on 2 missions. One mission is kind of like an underwater mission. And at this point, it's very James Bondy, you know. There are certain things he can do that don't necessarily carry over to the television show. For example, the eye, he doesn't have that telescopic zoom lens feature that we do see on the TV show. The eye is more of a hidden camera function that he can have, where he can kind of take pictures with his left eye. He does have the strength that we're used to seeing in the show on one arm and his two legs. But the other thing about the book is that they're able to hide and store a lot of other items inside his prosthetics. So, for example, like on his leg, the first mission involves like a lot of underwater stuff. Well, he's able to store a extra breathing apparatus, oxygen devices in his leg and stuff like that. And he's got all kinds of gizmos that can kind of pop out. Even out of his finger, he has some tools that he can get and that sort of thing. So it seems like they're kind of customizing his features depending on the mission that he's going to. The second mission he goes to in the book, it's in a Middle Eastern country. He has to he's trying to steal a jet fighter. So the first mission was underwater. He has to go take pictures, I believe, of a hidden nuclear sub facility somewhere in the Caribbean, I think, or something like that. And then the second one is in the Middle East, and he's got to steal a secret plane, a Russian MiG, I don't know what model. And the mission is him and his partner. They are out there trying to steal this plane. So yeah, it does turn very Bondy, very James Bondy at some point, you know, where the women are a little bit, James Bondy kind of women. They're the partner, but they're kind of swooning over him and that kind of, a little bit of that, you know, some of them are super tough women, you know, you do get the feeling that you're kind of watching, especially a Roger Moore kind of, it is the 70s. So, I guess that's where it's coming from. The book did inspire 3 other novels, one of them called Operation Nuke, the other one called High Crystal, and the other one called Cyborg 4. So those are some that I might at some point maybe pick up. Another difference is that, in the book, he's so cold in the beginning of his recovery. And that's something, granted, you can do that on a book. You can take your time to make him slowly become warmer to everybody else. In the TV show, or in the movies at least, the TV movies. Because here's the thing to keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons I never could make that connection of where did this start was because I've never seen before the original TV movies. The way the show was put together was they made a TV movie, it was successful. They made another TV movie, it was successful. They made another, they made a series of TV movies, and then they were like, all right, this is it. We're doing it. We're doing a TV show. And then they started doing the TV show. And I guess that's the model in the past was that, I don't know, sometimes or most times, maybe you just didn't, with a high concept show like this, you just didn't throw all the money, into a television series. You first had to kind of feel it out and, kind of like a pilot. And then you put out that pilot and see how people react to it. In this case, they were TV movies. So the first TV movie, which I was able to watch online, there's a couple of places. One of them is NBC.com has a lot, if not all, of the entire run of the $6 Million Man. And you can watch them there. The first TV movie is the one that covers the majority of this book. The other thing that's a little different is that there's a lot more, let's say, violence in terms of more people die in the book. When he engages his enemy, these people are dead. He kills quite a number of them, which is something they kind of avoided a little bit on TV, especially when you get to the 80s. The show's already over, but there was this trend to kind of like, this is kind of a kid's show. It's young adult, so we can't really having massacring people. You have to make it a little more child friendly, a little less violent. So they did scale back a little bit on that. And like I said before, the amount of tools, the amount of things he's got, at one point I think he's got like a dart that he can eject from his arm or something like that, like a poison dart or something. Yeah, these are things that never made it to the television show. It didn't go that far. And I read somewhere that was one of the things about the TV show was that they didn't, even though it did, they didn't want it to turn into James Bond. They didn't want it to be, the show, by the time you get to it, he's basically a secret agent. And it's one of these situations where it's like the secret agent that everybody recognizes is the Bond issue of, yes, he's all over the place. And I know he got a mustache at one point, which looked horrible as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, it's hard to kind of balance those two things. Is it more sci-fi? Is it more espionage? Is it sci-fi espionage? To me, the most memorable episodes that kind of come to mind are more of the sci-fi type of episodes. The episodes that deal more with other robots or the Bigfoot character. Anything like that is, to me, it's a little more memorable than just another mission to extract some information. And, it's like, okay, we can do that. All right, fine. This is, like I said, this is going to be something that I'm going to try to explore a little further. I'm trying to see if I can find those other books. I might start watching the show to get a better feel for it, how it went. Because, like I said, I do remember these highlights, but I just don't remember the details, which is kind of cool. And I know they've tried a couple of times to revive the show under the Bionic Woman banner. And then I know even within the last 5 years, I think there have been rumblings of a movie. I think they said it's the $6 billion man or something like that. I don't know if that's ever going to happen. That's in development hell, as they say. But I was pretty happy overall in terms of, even though there are a lot of differences between the book and the TV movie, it is pretty faithful to the story, more or less. Again, RoboCop kept screaming in my head, when it comes to reading this book. There is no way in hell that RoboCop did not take a lot of cues from this. Even though I'm sure there's other sources, it's right there. It's right there in the book. The struggles with the individual having no rights because he's the property of the government or the police or whatever it is that he's the property of. The disconnect with the family that he had at one point or almost had at one point. Him getting used to it. Him struggling, with these memories and so forth. So the other thing was that while I'm reading this book, I happened to go to a collector's store far from here in St. Augustine. I was visiting my son, and on the pegs, they had, from Zika Toys, I don't remember seeing these in the stores, but I know they were out there somewhere, but I didn't pay too much attention to them. $6 Million Man, what should we say here, about 4-inch long figures. And these came out back in 2013, so not too long ago. And what I picked up was Steve Austin in the red tracksuit and Bionic Bigfoot. These are so cool. I mean, the packaging is so 70s looking. Again, I've talked about this before. These vintagey recreations that they do now. These different companies. Again, another different company I've never heard of. Goes into the mix, and they were supposed to apparently release. Let's see. This particular wave is Steve Austin Bigfoot, and then Steve Austin in a blue tracksuit. But then later they were supposed to release Oscar Goldman, Rudy Wells, Barney Hiller, the $7 Million Man, and Mr. X, Stalin's robot. Okay, that's cool. Well, from what I understand, the second wave never came. I don't think they made enough money on the first wave, but at least I was able to pick up these guys, and they're very iconic because, again, there's such a huge Kenner connection. My Star Wars toy obsession and how Kenner was involved in both of these, and this is one of those lines of toys, especially the old $6 Million Man figures, the large, talk about the foot-long ones, that I kind of every now and then go around, see if I can find something, to see if there's something close to it. Again, I'm looking for a Steve Austin and a Bigfoot, really, or even the robot-looking one with the robot head. And they're still super expensive, hard to find. That's going to be one of these ongoing things. I never owned them. I never did, so it's not like I'm reconstituting these. But they're ones that, after a while, I remember looking and I'm like, wow, these look really nice. When I came here. And in the meantime, because I cannot afford the larger size ones, these are super cool looking. They're just so nice. And they're very well made. And they're just such a great representation of these particular characters. I'm really disappointed that they didn't go forward with these lines. They didn't do that second wave I was just telling you about. But at least, this kind of puts you back in the mood and in that mindset of watching the show and being able to have something of a collectible having to do with it. I would say the book is great. Get at least this first book. I haven't read the rest of them yet, but get at least the first one because it is such a good connection to the origin of the $6 Million Man. And I don't know if there are other people out there who had the same issue, that They remember the show, but they just don't remember how it all started. And that first episode, that first TV movie gives you that entire, material. It's all in there for you to enjoy. The other two movies continue with, the progression of the character, and you kind of start to get the feel of how it's going to work. The first TV movie also has Darren McGavin as the government connection. He's the cold government guy who's telling everybody what to do. Later on in the series, it becomes Oscar Goldman. They turn it into a different actor, different character. For some reason, they went with Darren McGavin. He's a very good actor, but it just seems a little weird. It's like, because I guess we're used to seeing him in some other things. And obviously later on you have the Bionic Woman that, the stories merge together and kind of go into separate directions, with the television show. But big recommendations, big recommendation. Get the book. You can still find it on eBay. It might take a little bit of time to find a cheap copy, but you can get a more expensive copy if you want, but you'll be able to find it pretty cheap. And these figures are a little hard to find. That was one of the things when I went to the store, they wanted like $15 for each one. And I was like, oh man, I don't know if I want to pay $15. That's almost like, it felt like retail price. And, I'm always looking for a bargain. So I tried looking online and I went on eBay because, you figure eBay, they'll have it. There was like none to be found on eBay. I'm like, what's going on here? Are these that rare that they're not even being sold on eBay? And then a couple days later, when I came home, I'm looking, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. These came out in 2013. Wow, they're that old. So I'm doing a little more research, and I'm finding that, the price, that is the price. That is the retail price. They're a little rare because I guess they didn't sell as many, but therefore there are not a lot out there that people are trying to flip. And the ones that I did see are more of the rare ones. The blue tracksuit guy, and they want like $50, $60 for that or something. No, that's okay. I like the red tracksuit. The red tracksuit is what I remember, from the show. More than the blue tracksuit, and Bigfoot. I needed a Bigfoot because I know I was never going to get my hands on a large size Bigfoot. But again, these are cool little collectibles, if you're into the $6 Million Man.
What did I teach you?
You fought the Duke of New York. You're a number one.
You will not laugh. You will not cry. You will learn by the numbers. I will teach you.
Can you dig it?
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
That spawn of Satan.
Oh, really?
The Force will be with you, always.
For today's poster of the month, we are going to focus on a Star Wars poster that is not exactly a one-sheet, but it is an officially requisitioned poster that was made before Star Wars came out, obviously. For the purpose, I guess, whether it's for additional art, for future projects, for future marketing, for future merchandising, or according to some of the articles I've read, that this was also part of the possible conceptual posters used to be able to hopefully sell the film to a studio in a similar manner in which now, we all are more familiar with Ralph McQuarrie's paintings as the basis for what was, shopped around and brought around meetings in order to convince, I guess eventually 20th Century Fox to fund this film. The poster that I'm talking about was painted by John Berkey. And you guys, for all we know, might actually have this and you don't even realize it or have forgotten about it, because this is the poster that actually came with the original soundtrack of Star Wars. If you look at that two-sided, fold, inside the record jacket, folded up, aside from the records, you had a free poster that was included. Now, this is an unusual poster because it's a different kind of style than most of the ones you're familiar with. I mean, if you think about the one sheets that are out there, the Jung, the Hillenbrand, the traditional one sheets having to do with Star Wars, even Struzen, if you think about it, all of the different ones that are out there, this one is a little different because things look just a little odd. What the poster depicts, which you obviously will see in the art that I'll include here, is the attack on the Death Star. But the attack on the Death Star and the battle that's taking place, it's really not taking place in the trench like it does in the movie or around the surface. It is basically taking place in orbit. And what you see in at least half of the poster is the Death Star itself. Now, the Death Star looks very, very different than it does in Star Wars. This Death Star, to me, resembles a lot more the conceptual model that Colin Cantwell had made of the Death Star, with much, much, much more detail and structures, and just you could see cross sections everywhere. Very, very super detailed surface, as opposed to the finished model, which was kind of smooth. Granted, the closer you get to it, the more detail you see. Obviously, but it kind of looks almost like the second Death Star in terms of, how that second Death Star from Return of the Jedi, especially on the sections that have not yet been built, and you see the guts of the Death Star and all those cross beams and pipes and tubes. That's what this one kind of looks like. The entire surface is like pipes and tubes and cross sections and all kinds of stuff like that. So that's one thing that's a little different. Now, crisscrossing all over the place. Obviously, you can see some stars around the edges, and you actually even see some planets in the bottom, like a large, I don't know, a moon or a planet or something. But it's kind of in the background. But crisscrossing everywhere on this painting, you have X-Wings, Y-Wings, TIE Fighters, and Millennium Falcons. And yes, you did hear me right, Millennium Falcons. For some weird reason, which I haven't really been able to find why, this artist chose to multiply the amount of falcons like all over the place. Like there's, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 or more Millennium Falcons flying around in this poster. Don't understand why. The X-Wings look pretty true to what they look like in the movie. The Falcon looks pretty true to what it looks like in the movie. The Y-Wings look pretty true, a little more, I would say, arrow-shaped heads than the final product, maybe, I would say. And the TIE Fighters really look really good and very accurate if you're looking at them from the front. Now, what's bizarre is that on some of the drawings, you see them sideways, and the actual wing is like a rectangle instead of a hexagon, which is kind of bizarre, because the changes that are different in this painting don't really coincide, at least as far as I can tell, with any specific period where we might have been in a conceptual drawing stage. You know what I'm saying? Like, for example, the Millennium Falcon, it looks like the Millennium Falcon. It doesn't look like an earlier version of the Falcon, like the Space 1999 Falcon, the Rebel Blockade Falcon. No. This is the regular roundish, with the mandibles Falcon. So right off the bat, you can kind of say, okay, well, this isn't a first concept. This is somewhere along the way. So he must have had some kind of reference, because it's really pretty accurate what it looks like. More or less, I would say, because if you look at the top, it almost looks like there's a cylindrical section in the top where the top gun of the Falcon would be. That just looks a little different. And especially when you try to identify some of the other ones in the picture, when they try to do different angles of it, it looks like these different sections just are not what the final product looks like. So it's really difficult to kind of say, how was it that he came up with these versions of these models? Was he shown a picture? Was he shown something? Was it described to him? Was it a drawing? Was it a photograph of a model? Who knows? The Y-Wing, for example, looks very, very accurate. And it also looks very, very much like the final design of the Y-Wing, not the earlier Colin Cantwell models, and even Ralph McQuarrie paintings, the earlier ones where it had the little bubble top, the glass bubble on the top, that sort of thing, with the dual pilot station. No, this one, it looks pretty close to what the final version was. The X-Wings look good. The engines, to me, look a little bigger than normal, a little fatter, chunkier, but I'm just nitpicky here. There's a section in the middle, right, kind of like dead middle in the poster, more or less, where it looks like a couple of ships are exploding. And the middle ship, I would say must be an X-Wing just because of the color, because it has a red stripe going through it. But it's really hard to tell if it is an X-Wing exploding or some other ship that I couldn't even describe to you. It's really, really odd. But by far the weirdest thing is the profile of the TIE Fighter. Because the front view of the TIE Fighter is dead on perfect. It's just perfect. You know, the way that the height of the wings, the cockpit, the struts that connect between the wing and the cockpit, all that looks pretty close, pretty accurate. But on the shots where you see the side of the TIE Fighter, and the reason why it kind of sticks out so much is also if you look at the ones that are coming towards you, the ones that are pretty straight on, more or less, when you try to look at the pattern inside the wing, that 6-section pattern that forms the hexagon, more or less, you only kind of see 2 sections on top and maybe 2 on the bottom. So it's like, wait a minute, something looks a little off. So then when you actually do look at some of the other smaller ones that are painted in here, where you do get a profile, it's a big old rectangle. So it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Are you telling me that he was never told that the wings are hexagons instead of rectangles? Again, that's kind of odd. I do not think that an artist would be given that much leeway in terms of being able to mess with the structures, with already pre-established structures. Again, unless you're doing something in a conceptual stage. If this is conceptual drawings, then yeah, the artist is more or less allowed to go a little crazy with it. Which is why it's so hard to kind of pinpoint, you know, exactly when some of these drawings, especially this particular poster I'm talking about, was made. Some of the information I found out there refer to him being contracted way early on to help promote the backing of the film, which would tell me that there would be nothing at that stage. What's really interesting is that in some of the interviews that he's quoted, he talks about how he's not a big fan of, I guess, science fiction and that sort of thing. Ironically, one of the paintings that apparently inspired, or I guess is referenced many times that he did, is about a spaceship, a rocket ship looking ship, flying kind of upside down on the, passing this very structurally mechanical planet looking thing, which looks a heck of a lot like a Death Star model. And it's not, because this is one of his original paintings. This could also be one of the paintings that Lucas kind of enjoyed and liked. And that's why he contracted this particular artist to come and do some work for him. Again, the similarities are incredible between that painting and, for example, the Ralph McQuarrie Y-Wing painting of the Y-Wing kind of diving into the Death Star, and you see the Death Star behind. And again, the irony is incredible, or the coincidence, I don't know what you want to call it. But in Berkey's original painting, the ship is upside down, and people have mistakenly many times repositioned the picture so that the ship is right side up, but in all reality, it's being displayed wrong. Well, same thing with McQuarrie. He drew one of his pictures of a Y-Wing diving into the Death Star, purposely upside down, and people have made that mistake also in the past. So, yeah, it's kind of weird. It's almost as if, you know, it's conceivable that Lucas saw this painting and said, you know, to McQuarrie, okay, for this particular one, I want you to paint, you know, one of our rebel ships diving, and I want you to kind of follow this inspiration, you know. And and when you put it side by side, you'd say to yourself, yeah, that's pretty dead on close. So apparently this artist did a number of paintings. None of them, like I said, ended up being the final product of the poster used for the film. However, the 2 most noticeable ones that you might be familiar with are, number one, the one that I'm talking about now, the one that came free with the album, with the 2-record album. And the other one could have been, because it looks more like, you know, that 1-sheet poster that you would have for the movie. And this is the one where you see Vader in the background and he's holding a fist, and very lightly you could kind of say that he's holding a lightsaber. It's possible he's holding a lightsaber. It's not very clear what exactly, because the beam of the lightsaber, the blade, is kind of not very well defined. It's not red. So at this point, again, you could say this was such an early concept period that they hadn't finalized some of that. Vader looks pretty close to what Vader finally looked like. Like the mask looks pretty accurate. In the background, you have Y-Wings and X-Wings. You don't have, in that particular one, a Falcon. I don't see a Falcon anywhere, or a series of Falcons like you do on the record one. You do see the Death Star in the background, but again, the Death Star looks different. It looks very textured. The radar dish portion of the Death Star is just a very slight indentation. It's not the deep dimple that you end up having, with the final version of the Death Star. In the forefront, you also have Luke and Leia. Luke is holding, yes, what could be most likely is a lightsaber. But what's funny about it is that you barely see the hilt. You do see the blade, but the blade is very short and it's very pointy. Plus, it's yellow, which is like, oh my God, here we go again with a yellow lightsaber. Is this why, Kenner screwed up with the yellow lightsaber? All these years ago, in the beginning of the toy making process, did this inspire the insanity of the yellow lightsaber? And again, going back to Vader, his lightsaber doesn't even have a color. It's almost white at one point, and then it kind of blends with the blue background. So it's like, I wonder if this has anything to do with this. You also see Leia. She's holding a gun. And R2 and C-3PO are off to the side. And to the other side, you got a couple of whole bunch of stormtroopers. The stormtrooper helmets look a little wonky. They look a little too thick on the bottom. Again, it could be the artist rendition, or it could be whatever they supplied him with to paint these drawings. And this particular drawing, like I said, this could have been a one sheet. Even what's funny is that even on the top, the very, very top of the painting, there's a lot of empty space. Above Vader. There's at least I would say a quarter. A quarter of this painting has empty space, which is where you would put Star Wars on it. Well, this poster is finally the one that was eventually used for the novel. If you guys remember, I think it was the book club novel of Star Wars that was put out there. Which I remember I had it, and I have it. I had it because I had lost the cover somehow. And I have it because I then repurchased it again not too many years ago with the cover. And the cover of that book, which is that blue kind of book, is that art. They were able to recycle that art. And you have Star Wars on the top. But instead of putting Star Wars all the way on the top in two lines, they kind of put Star on the right vertically and Wars on the top horizontally. So it's a very unusual way of splitting the logo. It's a way that you will probably never see it again, because I would say 99% of the logo that you will see in most merchandising is Star Wars, top and bottom. That's how it works. But again, that secondary picture is probably the second most popular one that you might be familiar with. Now, with that said, he did make a couple of other paintings, drawings, sketches, I don't know what you want to call them. Some of them pretty intricate, some of them pretty simple. There's another one I've seen pictures of the Death Star. And again, a firefight happening, a space battle happening in the atmosphere, off, not so close, but part of the Death Star, I guess, being in flames or an explosion taking place. There's other still shots of, again, more X-Wings and TIE fighters fighting along the edge of the Death Star. Really interesting stuff. There's also some other art that eventually got used in one of the DVD versions of Star Wars that was put out a while back. I think it might have been the unaltered edition or something, where they take some of these posters or some of these sketches and they incorporate them into the brochure, the chapter title brochure that comes with the DVD. So they had one for Star Wars, for Empire, and Jedi. Now, what's interesting is that for Star Wars, it's very clear they're using Star Wars art that was drawn, similar to these posters, the same exact style, that kind of thing. But it wasn't something that was really promoted as a full-blown poster, but they were able to use sections of that, or either earlier versions, earlier concepts, earlier drafts, if you will. I forget what is the artistic term for a draft, sketches or whatever you call them. For Empire, it's funny because there really is no Empire art. I believe he was already not involved in Empire by the time that art was needed. So for that particular DVD brochure section, pamphlet, they used another Star Wars picture, and they grabbed a picture of Vader, which makes kind of sense because, yeah, it is Vader. Vader is the very important character in Empire, and I remember him being used as part of the logo, some of the merchandising logo, so that makes sense. But then for Jedi, there's actually a Jedi one, which they kind of also split with Star Wars. So once again, Empire used some Star Wars art, and Jedi used some Star Wars art and specific Jedi art, which, to the best of my knowledge, came from some Topps Galaxy, Star Wars Galaxy cards that I don't know if he did some Galaxy cards or the Galaxy cards reprinted some stuff that he did, for other Star Wars purposes. But what they did is they were able to reuse some of that art from this Return of the Jedi Galaxy card in order to do that third DVD, the Return of the Jedi DVD. What else? He also has apparently done the art for the Return of the Jedi Death Star Battle Parker Brothers video game. Wow. So if you guys remember that one, he also did some work for that. So there will be some art. Now that art looks completely different. Stylistically, it's more realistic. It is very, very different than the conceptual looking stuff that we saw on that other poster. Ironically, even the picture of the Death Star, my God, it looks so much more like a modern Death Star, because I guess by this point, whether he admits it or not, because I think, like I said, in these interviews, he still claims to have never seen the films, it is more lifelike and more modern looking. He's an interesting character. He's done some work before. He does have a background, obviously in art, but in poster making. Apparently, let me give you some of the names of the movies that he has worked on before. Like I said, he's done a lot of other stuff, and some of it is technical sci-fi looking, even though that doesn't seem to be his favorite, according to the interviews, and that's how Lucas became familiar with him. But he's done some work, if you guys remember, for Dune. He did a European poster for Dune, 1984. The Concorde, Airport 79. He did the poster for that. When Worlds Collide. Whew, that's an old one. Orca. Now, here's a poster that's really, really weird. I mean, it's really different kind of style, but it's kind of 70s in a way, if you think about it. Interesting story about Orca. Again, I don't know how accurate the story is because it sounds bizarre. And maybe it's because the man was older and he's not really telling the story right. But according to the story, he got a phone call from Lucas complaining that the Orca poster was too much like the Jaws poster and that Lucas was suing him and the studio because of it. Kind of makes no sense because Lucas had nothing to do with Jaws. It was Spielberg. So it's hard to really tell if he was telling the story right or if Lucas was maybe calling on behalf of Spielberg, let's say, because of this lawsuit that was taking place. I believe the lawsuit got nowhere. But yeah, that Orca poster is really interesting looking. It's really, really interesting. The Black Stallion, if you guys remember that. Raise the Titanic, Superman 3, Star Trek The Motion Picture. This is not the one-sheet movie poster. I think this is more of the pre-movie poster, the preview poster that it's basically a giant, giant shot of the Enterprise kind of coming towards you more or less in an angle. And in the bottom, you have the pictures of all the cast. So I am familiar with that one. Meteor, if you remember that film, Meteor, The Towering Inferno, another disaster classic. The Neptune Factor. I don't think I've ever seen that. King Kong. Now, this King Kong poster is the one from the 1976 film. Very, very familiar with that poster. I remember, again, this is one of those cases where the poster is better than the movie. The poster looks a lot better than the movie. This is the shot of it's King Kong, and he's got 1 foot on each of the Twin Towers. He's holding what might be, I guess, a train on fire in one hand, and he's holding the girl on the other hand, and he has helicopters buzzing and jet planes buzzing around them. And I remember I always thought to myself, wow, that's, I don't remember that scene in the movie. I don't remember him standing between the two buildings. But yeah, he's responsible for that one. Oh my God. Yeah, that was a good one. But here's another interesting story is that he apparently did some work for Universal right after Star Wars. And at one point, he was not allowed to continue working on either one because this was around the time where Fox, on behalf of Lucas, sued Universal for Battlestar Galactica. So he was doing work with Battlestar Galactica, just like a lot of other Star Wars people, John Dykstra, special effects, even Ralph McQuarrie did some Battlestar Galactica work. But then the lawsuits happened between those two studios. And then I believe they even said that the studio then countersued Fox because they were saying that the droids from Silent Running were copied, in Star Wars. So again, because of that legal dispute between the studios, he apparently had to kind of stop working for both of them, I guess, until they resolved their issues. So that kind of got him away, from any future or work with Star Wars, which would kind of make sense of why we don't really see him doing anything for Empire. It might have been during that preliminary Empire stage where all of a sudden he's not participating in creating all this art like he had done before. So that's really, really interesting, that he was involved, in a lot of this stuff. And in one of these websites, we even see some pictures of some preliminary Jurassic Park work that he had also done. He passed away a number of years ago, but it is really, really interesting how, this art still remains out there and how, we are so used to, when we kind of dig deep, into a specific section of Star Wars and McQuarrie becomes, the benchmark for everything having to do with the art, and then you go a little deeper and then you start to find these other names and then you have another sublayer of names. And yeah, it's really interesting, and we talked about this before, how they commission work from everybody and they pay everybody to do some work. A lot of these people don't get paid a ton of money, but everything is kept. And they keep everything, and they eventually, at some shape or form, they end up using it. And in this particular case, something that didn't make it all the way to, one-sheet infamy or one-sheet territory, that kind of thing, ends up being part of the marketing, of some major items, such as a record or a book, the soundtrack, the official soundtrack. That's a big deal. The first official novel, by George Lucas. Remember, this was ghostwritten by Alan Dean Foster, but it became that official first novel, and there you go. There's the art. And you're like, wow, this stuff really looks wild. It has a different look. It has a different feel. It doesn't have the McQuarrie. It doesn't have any of those other, one-sheet poster guys style, an artistic flavor to it. It's a complete different flavor on its own that even up to this day, that art keeps showing up here or there. Believe it or not, I think I have a tie that uses the art of Vader holding that lightsaber from the novel. But I've seen that picture, in many other things. And again, even this soundtrack poster, you might see sections of it recycled and reused in other mediums. So if you have the record and you haven't looked at it in a while, or maybe you haven't looked at it at all, period, take a look, because you might still have this poster, and it makes for a great, framed poster to have. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed today's show. We started off with a little bit of a revisit to the $6 Million Man. We've done one a very long time ago, but this time we focused on the book that actually inspired the show. It was very interesting to find out the similarities and the differences between the two. And also, I'm really happy with those action figures I talked about that I was able to get. If I can't have the real thing, I might as well have the next closest thing to it. But then we also talked about our Star Wars poster, the record poster, the Berkey poster. It's a fantastic poster, and it's funny because I still see some people will post pictures of their bedroom, for example, from 1977 or 78, and you'll see that poster, just like that old Vader poster I was telling you about a few months ago. You'll see this poster also show up in people's walls, but it's right now it's right here in my office as one of my rotating posters that I have here. So, on behalf of everybody here, thanks for listening, and we will see you next time here at GeekFest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody.
Mission Control. Steve, what is it? What's wrong?
I was hoping you could tell me.
He's alive. He lost an arm, 2 legs, and 1 eye, but he's alive.
I'm not sure he'd want to live if he can't be the man he was.
What if he could be more than the man he was? We have the technology to rebuild him. I want it done no matter what the cost.
He's the man. He's the man. Catch him if you can, beat him if you can, love him if you can. Now he's the $6 million man.
If you would like to subscribe to our show, send us messages, or see video links to some of the topics we talked about today, please visit our homepage at GeekFestRants.com or our YouTube channel, Facebook page, or iTunes at GeekFest Rants.
I don't know what we're yelling about!
GeekFest Rants is produced by Carlos Perone, copyright 2019.
This broadcast is part of the IC Robots Radio Network. Visit icrobots.com for this and many other nerd/nostalgia related podcasts. You won't be sorry for long.